For more on the 2020 race, let's bring in our headliner, Dr. Bill Bennett, former Secretary of Education, Fox News contributor, and host of The Wise Guys on Fox Nation. Dr. Bennett, always a pleasure to have you on America's Newsroom. Thank you for being here. So what do you think,
Sandra.
What do you think about this, these calls to abolish the Electoral College? And you just heard Elizabeth Warren making that call.
Yeah, well, I guess the Democrats might want to get rid of the Constitution next. Might as well, given their point of view. There's a reason there's an electoral college. The founders thought that we should not be like the French. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote in his great book, Democracy in America, that France is governed by this large entity called Paris, and that it's like the head of the spider, and the other parts are the thin legs. And Tocqueville said the genius of America is that we don't have the country controlled by two large urban masses. And if you have L.A. and New York basically controlling a large part of the popular vote, that's what you'll have. Differences are different and in different regions of the country, and the founders understood that. By the way, something very few people know, the popular vote was won by Hillary Clinton. However, almost all of that margin was in the state of California. If you take California vote out of it, and I know you can't unless they secede from the Union, which I think they're thinking about, the other 49 states, Donald Trump won the popular vote as well as the electoral vote. So it's a tricky business. But I'll stick with the founders over over Elizabeth Warren. Thank you.
Wouldn't it give the bigger states, the New Yorks and the Californias of the world, a lot more say, a lot more sway, frankly, in presidential elections?
The bigger states with population, yes, it certainly would. And I think what the president was saying was right. You'd run your campaigns through New York City and Los Angeles and the like. And that's not a representation of what the country is or a representation of what the country's interest is. Not only do those population centers not represent all the people of the United States, their interests, financial, economic, cultural, are different from the interests of people across that the rest of that
Dr. Bennett, it seems also one of the big questions that is emerging for Democratic candidates. One of the first questions they're asked is whether or not you're a socialist. Here's Senator Cory Booker taking that one on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a capitalist. Monopolies are not capitalism. I am a Democrat. I believe in fundamental democratic principles. I believe that we need more democracy, not less. I believe all this money in politics is anti-democratic.
This debate and these calls for socialist policies by some candidates doesn't seem to be going away, Dr. Bennett.
It's not going away. It was instigated by Bernie Sanders. He was the original font of this, and now it's caught on. Bernie must be a little upset that everybody's mouthing his lines. But round and round it goes. Where it stops, I think I know, which is socialism light. You're going to get this kind of, well, I'm a capitalist, sort of, but I think we should inject a little socialism into it. It's not a good place for them to go. It's not a good place for them to be. There is strong support for the ideas of socialism among the millennials and the next generation after the millennials, Generation Z. But I think that's the problem there is our educational system, about which I could talk forever, but I won't. But I don't think it works in a general election. And if you take a close look, which I think Republican Party needs to do, needs to attend to, at socialism, what it is wrought, what it does to people, it's a great issue for the Republicans. Socialism is as socialism does, and socialism has failed wherever tried.
Meantime, we reported this morning Congressman Devin Nunes is suing Twitter for $250 million. Is this a case of the congressman being thin-skinned, or does he have a point?
Oh, I think he has a point. It was the head of Twitter, wasn't it, John, who said that there was bias in Twitter?
Jack Dorsey.
And I think, and I think there's bias in a lot of these companies. And I think Devin Nunes has a very important point. We've created this enormously powerful social media, but we haven't yet figured out how to control it, kind of like Prometheus and fire, you know? How do we control this thing? You mentioned the New Zealand situation and so on. But I don't think there's any question that there's bias in these companies. The interesting thing is having some exposure to how these companies operate. I believe they don't think they are biased. They think they are just playing it right, straight level, and that a guy like Devin Nunes is a threat to the Republic. and a guy like Bernie Sanders is maybe the savior. But this is a problem of the bias that's brought into it. Big problem, needs to be addressed.
And I want to make sure I got his exact words in there. Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, remember he testified before Congress last year. He said that his platform is a kind of, quote, digital public square, although he insisted that Twitter, as a private company, retains the right to censor speech. So we'll see where all of that goes. Meanwhile, some calls for changes to higher education. Here is Ivanka Trump on that. Dr. Bennett, listen. I'm sorry.
We need to modernize our higher education system to make it affordable, flexible, and outcome-oriented so all Americans, young and old, can learn the skills they need to secure and retain good-paying jobs. We look forward to working with bipartisan members of Congress.
So the White House, Dr. Bennett, is proposing limits on student loan borrowing as part of the higher education reforms. Would these changes be effective? Would you throw your support behind them?
Well, I think Ivanka Trump has taken a very serious look at this. Very pleased that the White House is doing it. This is a huge problem, and I think it's got a lot of moving parts. Limiting may be one answer. I think also getting the universities, the institutions, to have a little more skin in the game here is important. Remember a couple of facts about this. We have $1.5 trillion that the government is owed in unpaid student loans, and it's on its way to $2 trillion. This is the largest single liability in the federal budget. Also, remember that of students who start college, Sandra, about 50% of them do not finish within 6 years. So a lot of people are ending up holding debt without a degree and without a job. This affects people's choices in life and so on. It's a big problem. It's been avoided by a lot of people up till now. I'm glad Ivanka Trump and the Trump White House is addressing it. I'd like to be part of the conversation.
Very interesting. And you are here. We're talking about you're talking about the loan repayment. They're talking about simplifying that. There's 5 income-based repayment programs. They're talking about condensing that into one and capping monthly payments at 12.5% of the borrower's discretionary income. So it's something for everybody to think about as we continue to learn more. Just final thoughts from you, Dr. Bennett, before we let you go.
Well, I think the private sector can be very helpful here. You know, the private sector often has thought things through in a more efficient way than the government. So I think they should absolutely be called on. But there are a lot of pieces to this. And again, I'm very glad it's being addressed. It's been growing, festering for a long time. About time we took a hard look at it and made it simpler for the students and their families.
Yeah. Dr. Bill Bennett, always appreciate your time, and thank you for coming here this morning.
Thank you, Sandra, John.
All right.
Thank you.